Imagine standing at the edge of a dense rainforest where every distant sound hides lives almost untouched by the modern world. For generations, most of us believed every human story had already been discovered, mapped, and carefully placed inside familiar history books forever. Yet, deep inside one isolated forest, a small community quietly carried clues that scientists never expected to find within living people. Their daily routines looked ordinary: hunting, gathering, protecting families, and avoiding outsiders, while unknowingly preserving an extraordinary genetic history across countless generations. Most people assume human history follows one straight path, beginning in Africa before spreading across continents through predictable migration routes and settlements. That explanation remains strongly supported by science, yet every major discovery reminds researchers that the complete story is still unfolding today. When geneticists carefully compared modern DNA with ancient remains, unexpected patterns appeared where nobody had seriously expected them to exist before. Those patterns pointed toward a remote population whose ancestry seemed surprisingly different from neighboring communities living only short distances away for centuries. Scientists approach these findings with caution because extraordinary conclusions require extraordinary evidence, especially when studying isolated people with limited historical records available. Anthropologists realized the mystery extended beyond one tribe, because every human carries inherited fragments connecting countless generations across thousands of years together. The rainforest itself became part of the investigation, protecting communities from outside contact while preserving traditions shaped by difficult landscapes and changing climates. Ancient rivers, thick forests, dangerous wildlife, and natural barriers limited movement, allowing unique genetic signatures to remain surprisingly unchanged through many generations. Researchers never claimed these people belonged to another human species, but evidence suggested their ancestors experienced an unusually separate evolutionary journey for remarkably long periods. That possibility challenged assumptions about migration, adaptation, and survival, without erasing the overwhelming evidence that all modern humans ultimately share common African origins. Every new sample raised another careful question instead of delivering immediate answers, forcing scientists to rethink familiar maps of humanity's ancient movements across continents. Behind laboratory results stood real families, living cultures, and communities deserving respect, rather than sensational stories built around misunderstood scientific discoveries and exaggerated myths. The greatest surprise was not that this remote tribe existed, but that their DNA quietly preserved chapters history had almost completely forgotten. To understand why researchers describe these genetic discoveries as remarkable, we must first travel back to the earliest footsteps our ancestors left behind. More than 60,000 years ago, small groups of modern humans slowly crossed unfamiliar landscapes, following rivers, coastlines, forests, and changing seasons together. These early travelers carried simple stone tools, shared survival knowledge, and adapted carefully because every new environment demanded different skills for staying alive. Evidence from archaeology suggests many groups gradually reached Southeast Asia before continuing toward islands separated by dangerous stretches of open water. Crossing those waters required planning, cooperation, and courage, proving early humans possessed abilities far beyond outdated assumptions about prehistoric life. Far from growing cities, dense tropical forests became home to communities that depended almost entirely upon hunting, fishing, wild plants, and seasonal resources. Generation after generation, children learned survival directly from parents, preserving traditions without written language, yet maintaining detailed environmental knowledge through memory alone. Natural barriers reduced frequent contact with neighboring populations, allowing cultures to develop independently while still remaining fully modern human communities throughout countless generations. Archaeological discoveries reveal that isolation never meant complete stillness because climate shifts repeatedly changed forests, rivers, coastlines, and available food across thousands of years. As sea levels rose after the last ice age, many ancient land bridges disappeared beneath expanding oceans forever. Communities once connected by foot suddenly found themselves separated by water, creating long periods with limited interaction between distant human populations. Researchers believe these changing landscapes influence migration routes, although many details remain uncertain because tropical climates rarely preserve ancient human remains well. Unlike dry caves or frozen ground, humid forests quickly break down bones, wooden tools, and other materials that archaeologists normally study carefully. This lack of physical evidence forced scientists to reconstruct ancient journeys using scattered discoveries from caves, coastlines, and rare preserved archaeological sites. Some researchers proposed repeated migration waves, while others argued small founding populations remained isolated after arriving surprisingly early within these remote regions. Neither explanation answered every question because each newly discovered artifact revealed only another small piece of humanity's enormous historical puzzle still waiting. Historical records from outsiders appeared much later, often describing remote forest communities without understanding their languages, traditions, or complex cultural identities completely. Modern anthropology encourages viewing these accounts carefully because early explorers frequently misunderstood unfamiliar customs through their own cultural expectations and limited observations. The deeper researchers explored ancient migration history, the clearer one mystery became: surviving evidence alone could never reveal the complete human story. Hidden inside living people existed another historical record, silently carried across generations, waiting for science to learn how to read its remarkable patterns. For decades, scientists relied on archaeology, language, and physical remains to reconstruct humanity's ancient journey across continents and changing prehistoric environments. Everything changed when advances in DNA sequencing allowed researchers to examine living populations alongside ancient human remains recovered from carefully excavated archaeological sites. Unlike appearance, DNA preserves biological information inherited across countless generations, offering another historical record hidden inside every living human today. Researchers began collecting genetic samples only after receiving ethical approval and informed consent, respecting both cultural traditions and community rights throughout every stage. Each DNA sample was compared with thousands of others from populations around the world using increasingly accurate genetic analysis techniques and advanced computing. The results revealed expected connections, because every modern human shares deep African ancestry despite enormous cultural, geographical, and biological diversity across continents today. Yet some remote populations also carried uncommon genetic patterns, appearing far less frequently among neighboring communities, immediately attracting careful scientific attention worldwide. Scientists emphasized these differences did not make anyone more ancient, superior, or separate from humanity, because all living people belong to the same species. Instead, evidence suggested certain populations experienced long periods with limited outside contact, preserving genetic variations gradually reduced elsewhere through repeated migrations and mixing. One remarkable example came from studies involving isolated communities across island Southeast Asia, where geography naturally limited frequent interaction for thousands of years. Researchers discovered DNA segments inherited from ancient populations, whose complete histories remain only partially understood, despite years of careful international scientific investigation together. Some of these genetic traces appear linked to encounters between modern humans and other ancient human relatives that lived across Eurasia long before recorded history. The strongest evidence involves Neanderthals and Denisovans, whose DNA still survives inside many living people despite those ancient populations eventually disappearing completely. Interestingly, Denisovan ancestry appears higher among several populations across Oceania and surrounding regions than among many people living elsewhere across the modern world. Scientists continue investigating whether isolation helped preserve these inherited genetic patterns longer than regions experiencing continuous migration and population mixing across centuries. However, researchers also acknowledge important unanswered questions because tropical climates destroy ancient DNA quickly, limiting direct comparisons with prehistoric human remains today. Every new genetic study undergoes independent review because extraordinary conclusions require repeated confirmation before becoming accepted within the broader scientific community worldwide permanently. Rather than rewriting humanity's origin, these discoveries refine our understanding, revealing history was more connected, complex, and surprising than earlier generations ever imagined. The greatest mystery now was no longer where these people lived, but what their remarkable genetic story could teach every human alive today. The greatest lesson from this discovery is surprisingly simple because isolated communities preserve history without realizing they are protecting priceless scientific evidence together. Their DNA does not replace established human history, but fills important gaps that archaeology alone could never completely explain with confidence. Scientists now recognize humanity's past resembled countless intersecting paths instead of one perfectly straight migration stretching across continents and thousands of generations. Every isolated population represents another chapter, adding detail without changing the fundamental understanding that modern humans ultimately share common African ancestry together. These discoveries also remind researchers that culture and genetics are different because shared DNA never defines language, traditions, beliefs, or personal identity completely. A remote forest community remains unique because of its people, knowledge, and traditions, not only because of remarkable genetic patterns inherited across generations. For anthropologists, protecting these cultures has become equally important because disappearing languages often erase historical knowledge unavailable anywhere else on Earth. Expanding roads, illegal logging, disease, and outside pressure continue threatening isolated communities whose traditional lifestyles survived for centuries against enormous environmental challenges. Researchers increasingly work alongside indigenous leaders, recognizing meaningful scientific progress depends upon trust, cooperation, ethical research, and genuine respect for local communities. Modern genetics continues improving every year, allowing scientists to examine ancient relationships with greater accuracy than researchers imagined only decades earlier. Even so, responsible scientists openly admit many questions remain unanswered because every discovery creates fresh mysteries, demanding careful investigation instead of quick conclusions. Future archaeological discoveries may reveal ancient remains that confirm today's leading theories or introduce completely unexpected evidence, challenging current scientific understanding once again. That uncertainty is not scientific weakness, but one of research's greatest strengths because knowledge grows through evidence rather than confident assumptions alone. Perhaps the most remarkable truth is that ordinary people, living ordinary lives, can preserve extraordinary stories hidden quietly inside their inherited DNA. Without building monuments or writing books, generations unknowingly carried biological records stretching back toward humanity's earliest migrations across unfamiliar prehistoric landscapes together. Their story reminds us history survives through people, families, memories, traditions, and inherited genes connecting every generation across thousands of remarkable years. Although continents, languages, and appearances changed over time, every living person remains connected through one shared human journey beginning long before civilization emerged. The next extraordinary discovery may already exist inside another forgotten community, patiently waiting until science learns where and how to look respectfully together. If this journey changed how you see human history, subscribe for more evidence-based documentaries exploring the remarkable stories still hidden beneath our shared past.